Welcome. I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. And once again, we have another astounding guest. Chris Krupar. I'd like to say I've known him for a long time. I've known him for about 4 days. I met Chris on, like we all do today, on social media. I was actually a guest on a podcast, and he was a guest as well. And the host, Marie Alessi, introduced us, and I reached out to Chris, and the rest is history. His story is very compelling, very similar. Unfortunately, him and I have a lot of similarities, both unfortunate and fortunately. The way we've both kind of taken adversity kind of head on, and I'm sure he'll talk about setbacks. I've had my plenty of setbacks. It isn't all living undeterred every day. As I like to say, Chris, living undeterred isn't living untested, you know. Well, Chris, welcome to the show, and appreciate your time logging in all the way from, I assume, beautiful New Mexico.
Yes, sunshiny New Mexico, 300 sunshiny days a year.
We're having a good one today for Iowa. It's not too bad. It's been really windy this spring. We've been averaging 25-mile-an-hour winds almost every day, which is not abnormal for here, but it's been 7-10 days in a row. So
yeah. This is our windy season as well, but we're a little drier, so we have a little more dust blowing around. But that's really our only bad weather. We don't have blizzards or hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes. So our bad weather is a couple of months of dust, and it's a fair trade-off for the rest of the year. So.
Well, we're going to find out how beautiful. I've been in New Mexico before, but not in this context. When our tour gets there, we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I guess I can start off by saying you and I are, members of a club, unfortunately, that nobody asked to join. And that's a club where we have a deceased child. And unfortunately, not just a deceased child, but the same manner.
Yes.
Our son Seth died in 2016, and your son was, I think, 4 years ago. Is that right?
Six and a half.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you were actually 6.5 then.
Yeah, six
Tell
and
us
a
a little
half.
about your son. Tell us a little bit about your journey. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we can go from there.
So yeah, my son Ryan, he was from the moment that he was born, he was a bundle of energy, and I would imagine. So his mother and I, we separated when he was about 2 years old, and so as often as it is with fathers who don't end up with primary custody of their children, I often wasn't able to get all the information as far as medical care for him and situations. But just on my own, I believe he most likely suffered from at least some level of attention deficit.
Mm,
I know I have a bit of it myself, right? I mean,
yeah.
I
Yep.
at my age, I'm 55. I don't know if you want me to say your age out loud, but
I'm 56.
so we're one
But
year
I have
apart.
attention deficit, as do you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, when we came up in school, there was no such term, and in fact, this was even before people were being termed as hyperactive. I mean,
Right.
basically, there were just kids who listened and kids who didn't,
Chris,
and
go
some.
out, go out and play. Go outside and
Yes,
play.
go expend your energy, right, before you
Yeah.
drive us crazy. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of noticed that early on with Ryan. And so I would assume that he eventually self medicated to slow things down, right?
Hmm.
That life was sort of whizzing by him quickly. And I definitely noticed that he had some anxiety problems. And
Hmm.
so I think we all know that, there aren't too many people who choose to get high just simply for the high. I mean, there
Hmm.
certainly are recreational users, but a lot of folks self medicate because they're trying to take care of something that's not being addressed otherwise.
Hmm.
And so, you and I, when we talked, I mentioned that, according to my son, he started using opioids as a result of somebody in his neighborhood passing away from cancer, and another neighborhood teen realized that maybe they should go look in a trash can. And unfortunately,
Mm.
back then, people weren't very careful disposing of medications. And so
Right.
there was quite the variety of what they found. And obviously, upon trying that, he found something that made him feel
Hmm.
better, and it kind of all went from there. So, and he struggled on and off. I worked with his mother, and we got him in a faith-based program,
Hmm.
and he actually managed to buy and use while he was in the program, which was,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah. And so then eventually his mother would put him in a different program, a little more higher end, a little more expensive. And then ultimately down the road, I would get him in a program in North Carolina that he managed to get through. And
Hmm.
so he battled this on and off. One of the things that I try to emulate from him is that in between the difficult times of his life, when he was awake, he lived life fearless. I mean, he was amazing at
Hmm.
everything that he did, whether it was skateboarding or snowboarding. So that's something that I've tried to work into my life. You mentioned that living a life undeterred doesn't mean that you live a life untested. And
Right.
for me, I'm definitely I'm tested. Every day isn't rainbows and butterflies. But I think
Right.
about my son. I mean, his struggles were really difficult, but in those good times, in those up times, I mean, he just lived completely fearless. And so,
Hmm.
that's a pattern that I've tried to apply to my own life. Is in between the testing times, when we're living undeterred, I'm doing it all out. But anyways, so my son had gone through those various programs. His battle was an on and off situation. He had actually stopped using for a while, and from what I can surmise, I don't know all the details, but it would seem like that day that he decided to fall off the wagon per se, it
Hmm.
ended up being fentanyl. And I don't know if he knowingly purchased, pure fentanyl. I just know that's what's listed on the death certificate was an accidental overdose of fentanyl.
And you couldn't have ever heard of fentanyl back then, because I had never heard of fentanyl when Seth died.
Yeah, it was much later that I really started to hear more information to understand how much more lethal it was, the variety
Right.
of synthetics that are out there. My wife has a brother who is 50-ish, and he's sadly been battling has been battling addiction for decades.
Hmm.
And in a conversation that we had with him several months ago, he mentioned that he's pretty much getting by on his methadone treatment. And unfortunately, when he uses crack cocaine. He no
Hmm.
longer looks for heroin because he said there just simply isn't any heroin out there anymore. That he knows that whatever
Hmm.
he's getting is something synthetic. It's either fentanyl laced or pure fentanyl. And he's been Narcan back himself, and he's had too many
Wow.
friends that have gone through that, often unexpectedly, unknowingly ingesting or taking fentanyl, thinking that it's heroin. So
Well, our stories are more similar than just our Seth and Ryan. How old was Ryan?
Ryan was 24, so he
Yeah,
was
Seth was
24.
23. I mean, you and I could probably sit down. There's probably 80% of the stories we could just flip flop the names and be
Yeah,
the same story.
yeah,
But something that really grabbed me when you and I talked on the phone, that probably is different than anybody I've talked with yet on this journey, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people. There's a couple comments you made. The illusion of permanence, which I love, because I talk about the word impermanence, and you just kind of flipped it from a different perspective. And I love that illusion of permanence. I want to have you talk about what you mean by that. And then we talk about changing the narrative, and everyone's out there, chasing big pharma and chasing drug cartels, and um, just spending a lot of time kind of on the supply side, changing the laws and all that. And you just said, I want to focus on how we process grief. I want to show people that we need to, and I just thought, and you use an example like at a funeral where it's all, everyone's in black and crying and you got the sad music. And it's like, you are so correct. And I even like recently, not recently, but the last couple of decades that we've had celebration of lives that we've had for deceased. Like our son Seth was in a garage celebration of life. We had, it was a celebration. We didn't really have a funeral. And then my wife's the same way. We had a celebration here at my house, opened up the house to friends. But I just think you're onto something there, Chris. And I want you to expand a little bit on the illusion of permanence. And then how do you think people need to be looking at grief differently. I'm in agreement with you, but I want to know how you think we can move this needle.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing the focus to here. I see you and others a little more out there on the forefront, bringing up the issues of awareness and prevention and things of that nature. But the simple truth is that for years to come, there are going to be people who lose their life to this
Mm-hmm.
situation, right? And so my focus is on helping those people, pick up the pieces more or less, or try to help them see life and death from a different perspective. Dying from fentanyl poisoning is one of many, many, many ways that people, can leave the planet. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know who gets the credit for the quote, but somebody was quoted as saying, "None of us are getting out of here alive."
Right.
I
Yeah.
think they try to give it to some actor or somebody. I don't really
Mark
know.
Twain or somebody probably said it.
Yeah, who knows? But that's an excellent quote, right? I mean, and that's the
Yeah.
reality. We often in our lives, at least superficially, will make comments about that that the young have that false sense of immortality, right? So they'll
Yeah.
try things that we won't. So
Right.
I mountain bike, I ski, but I evaluate the risk before I hit a jump or
Yeah.
drop off of some rocks. I evaluate that differently than my 18-year-old self would have, because I know my
Yeah.
recovery time is double now, right, or triple.
Yep.
And so we know that. I mean, we know that when we're younger, we think we're immortal, but really, even though we may think about our mortality and address it a little more as we move through life, when the rubber meets the road, when an unexpected death occurs, then we realize that though we've thought about it, we really haven't understood or embraced the fact that dying is absolutely part of our existence here, right?
Mm.
It's and I it was one of the quotes in the movie The Shawshank Redemption was to either get busy living or get busy dying. And so when I talk
Mm.
like this and I talk about embracing the fact that death is part of life, I certainly am not emphasizing the let's get busy dying aspect, right? It's more or
Absolutely.
less understanding that this is not permanent. None of us are immortal in this physical realm. And so therefore, whether we have another day or another, 5,000 days, we ought to be living each and every one of those days, as it is the blessing that it is. Every morning that we
Mm-hmm.
wake up and take a breath is amazing, right? It's another
Mm-hmm.
opportunity, it's another chance. But we do tend to fall into that illusion of permanence, that when somebody does die unexpectedly, the amount of grief, the amount of despair, and the things that we feel are related to the fact that we're in denial. We just can't believe that this could happen.
Why do you
And
think that is?
well, it's a lot of it has to do with the social constructs
Mm-hmm.
that we've all bought into. I mean, we are a societal people, right? And we share beliefs and we learn and we observe. From the time that we were young, we would hear about somebody dying in the family and we would attend a funeral service. And as you said, folks who were, in black, and it was sad and people were crying. And I mean, I've been to funerals where, the loved ones left behind were just screaming. I mean, just
Yeah.
absolutely screaming
Yeah.
and coming completely undone, right,
Or
in the
people couldn't even
situation.
go to a funeral because it was so traumatic just to go and honor somebody's life.
Yes,
That's
yes.
sad.
Yeah, and then we tend to, we I understand that there are typical, not guaranteed, but typical chronological orders to
Mm-hmm.
when we expect people to die. Grandparents go first, and then parents, and
Right.
then children, and then grandchildren. And so when it happens out of sync, it seems to hit us a little heavier. And I know that you've heard this saying, and that is that no parent should ever bury a child.
Yeah.
And when I hear anybody ever says that to me, no parent should ever bury a child, that my only response is, but every day they do.
Hmm.
Every day a parent buries a child. And it again, it seems to impact us more because it doesn't follow that typical chronological order. But that order is just something that we've come to believe in. It's something we've come to put faith in, that I'm going to outlive my children, my children are not going to live me. And we just marry ourselves to these ideas. And a lot of it too is that, we want to know that our children are going to carry on for us. There's a little bit of a selfish side of that we have an expectation and we have a desire to see how our children's lives play out. And in some instances, that the little selfish side of it is that we really are hoping for that companionship when we get into our later years. We want our children to be there for us. So there's just so many factors, societal factors, psychological factors that play into how it is that we end up being so devastated by the loss, especially the unexpected or out of the ordinary loss of a
Right.
loved one.
So, Chris, where does this reframing capability come from you? Is this something that you've been able to do your whole life, or is this something that you've learned through religious studies or life experiences? I mean, because it's a very unique skill set for you, and I would say for me, to be able to do this in light of something so horrific, and then on top of my wife soon afterwards, but I still was able to figure out a way to do it. So where does yours come from?
So, one thing is, when individuals like us have this kind of a conversation, right? I always want to make sure that those listening understand that I'm not sitting here saying this is how I do it and this is how you should do it, and
Or
you're
it's not painful,
right,
right?
or I'm not
Right.
diminishing or being reductive
Yep.
about what it means to go through grief. And so I always like to say that, look, every single human being at every moment where they sit, they are the total sum of all of their lives' experiences, right?
Hmm.
And so when each one of us is impacted by a significant life event like the loss of a loved one, we are standing there at that point in time, the sum of all of our experiences, everything we've learned. And so we're all different. I had worked in religious institutions in the past. I attended a Bible college. And so I was in a position where I was often looked to when families lost somebody.
Hmm.
And just by chance, it so happened that there were a significant number of families in these places where I worked that had unexpected deaths in the family. So at the one
Hmm.
church, I operated in a capacity of a youth pastor,
Hmm.
and I had a member of my youth group actually die in a car accident on their way to church, right? And so I was there to offer support to that family. Our church had a great music program, and my bass player and his son, who was a twin, passed away Sunday morning before church. He was hustling out to a job site and then was going to hustle back, pick up his wife, and go to church. But he actually fell asleep at the wheel. He was on some sort of an experimental medication,
Wow.
and they died instantly in a car crash. And I mean, I could. There's probably almost a dozen instances in my life that occurred where I knew people and was operating in a capacity to try to help them navigate, through that loss. So I probably had a little more than normal amount of preparation, having seen other people go through it. But I also noticed that that testing, right, the testing of their faith. I saw people battle with it. Here were
Hmm.
people in a belief structure that teaches that actually dying is a good thing. You go to heaven, right?
Hmm.
Not denying that the physical loss is uncomfortable, but
Hmm.
there are things in the Christian, the Judeo-Christian Bible that talk about that to live is one thing, but that to die is gain, right? But
Right.
when it occurs and you're tested in it,
Yeah.
you see these people struggle, and so it caused me to look into it deeper. Like,
Hmm.
if I'm going to believe these things, if I'm going to think that there's an eternal aspect to this, then why am I going to fall apart? If I happen to lose somebody.
Yeah, I've really struggled with that as well. In that I don't know what word I can find here, but you're exactly right. Is that there's a romanticism to the afterlife from a religious perspective, or maybe a mystical perspective. Like there's an ascension somewhere, a better place. We always says, that, you know, they're in a better place, but we should be almost happy if that was true. Then we should be really delighted that they're in a better place. But you're right. And then all of a sudden reality hits. It's like, yeah, but they're not here, and I want them here. So where
Yeah.
does spirituality and religion and faith and all these things come into play to help people navigate to see an opportunity here to become a better person themselves while they're here after a loved one's departed? Where does spirituality, faith, and religion come into play uh, in that context?
Well, I think it starts, without even getting into a particular faith or a particular religion, really breaking down, a belief in an eternal aspect to our existence. It really just begins, we can begin that just looking at the sheer biology of this, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, we are all in the process of getting old, and at some point, our physical existence is going to come to an end, right? And
Right.
so understanding that, you and I talked a little bit about where I'm at with my faith, and
Right.
I am a very spiritual person. And there's a quote, and again, I don't know who gets credit, but it's that we are eternal beings having a temporary physical experience.
Yeah.
And I've moved away from having to have this absolute definition of the eternal element of that. I've read a
Mm-hmm.
lot, I've studied a lot, and I've really come to realize that there's far more that I don't know than I do know, and I'm
Yeah.
perfectly okay with that. But our basic understanding of these things can just start with the acceptance of the biological fact that one way or another, our physical experience, our physical existence will come to an end. The eternal aspect of it, whether you believe, if you believe in God, if you believe in heaven, then yeah, those are elements that really should help us to offset some of that grief. If you believe in heaven, then you have an opportunity possibly to see that individual again in some other
To
form.
join him. Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
believe in reincarnation, then there's a chance that that individual has already opted to come back and take another run at this thing. And the basic, idea behind reincarnation is we keep coming back to work on things on a higher eternal plane, right? That we don't really understand in this temporary physical experience.
Mm-hmm.
But in all the things that I've learned and all the things that I've studied, it really just, I think again, starting with the biological aspect of it, and then what you believe, my thing is that if you believe it, then really truly believe it, right? If you believe that
Mm-hmm.
there's more to this, that there's an eternal aspect, an eternal element to it, then invest in that. Um, because again, I believe there's more than just this physical existence, and that's a whole other conversation that we
Mm-hmm.
could get into.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you just believe that we're all part of a universal energy, right? I mean, we
Right.
see that there are absolute patterns in the design of things,
Mm-hmm.
from everything from the universe itself down to the patterns that of a snowflake, right? And so things follow a certain vibration or a certain
Mm-hmm.
universal pattern. And so, in some way, shape, or form, even if it isn't anything more than our ability to leave a legacy, to leave a lasting impact that outlives us. There's a lot of reasons why we should live this life, this gift that we have. I mean, we're on a planet that's miraculously just the right distance away from just the right kind of a sun, has a
Yeah.
rotating, magnetic core that shields us. I mean, it's just, whether that's all just the greatest universal scientific coincidence ever,
Yeah.
or if there's intelligence involved in the design of it all. Either way,
Right.
every day that we take a breath is an incredible blessing, and that's really, again, accepting the biology of it. If you're going to believe, then really stand on your faith of what you believe, and recognize that there are physiological and psychosomatic responses that take place in our limbic brain that go back to, if you believe in evolution, at some point we were living
Mm-hmm.
in caves. And when we
Mm-hmm.
saw the saber-toothed tiger coming at us, our brains were trained to do things to protect us. And
Mm-hmm.
so receiving unexpected news, when I got the phone call that my son had passed away, there were chemical
It's a
reactions
defense
triggered in the brain.
mechanism. It's protecting you. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And it's designed to do just that. I mean, some people have the fight mode, some people have the flight mode,
Right. Yeah.
and regardless of which your tendency is, those were designed to protect you. And so, as even though I was maybe a little more prepared than the average person when my son passed. I didn't get to just, drift through that or glide through that unscathed by the physiological and psychosomatic effects of it. I mean, I still had to go through the process.
It seems we spend so much time on the semantics of, is there heaven or hell, or is there God or no God? And we spend all this time debating something simply that nobody really knows. And at the end of the day, all that really should matter is your behaviors towards your fellow humans and animals and nature. And so I write in my book pretty much that point, that if you're convinced you know the celestial journey, exactly how you're going to, where you're going after you die and all that, well, then you should be doing everything in your power today to get to heaven, right? If the reward is heaven, then why do you want to do things on earth that send you to hell? So in case that's all true, then I think being a good person would be a goal, because you want to go to heaven. Well, if you're, let's say, an atheist and you just simply don't buy any of that stuff and you just can't figure it all out, maybe you're agnostic, you just say, I don't know what's going on. Well, then if this is the only life we have, well, then shouldn't you want to focus on making this life the best life you can? So either way, it shouldn't prohibit a human being from living an intentional life on this planet right now. Doesn't really matter anything else. And I think in my book, I kind of submit that argument that I don't really care what people believe anymore. I've given up that whole, it seems like you have too. It's almost like I've surrendered to trying to argue with people, because first of all, I don't know what I'm even arguing for, other than the fact I don't know what happens when we die. And I'm like you, I've kind of got at peace at that. However, I'm open-minded that if the heavens parted and a chariot came down and all of a sudden somebody said, I exist, certainly I would then be a full-time believer. But I think the beauty of not knowing is simply it shouldn't stop us from being good people. And that seems what you're doing with your mission now, loving life after. And I notice you leave that word omitted on the website, which I think is genius, because the first couple of times I looked at it, I kept scrolling looking for living life after what? And then on your website, you tell me that's intentional. So I love that angle you've taken about, living. We both have the word living in our brands, living life after and then living undeterred. But so in regards to people learning to, I hate this, and I know you do too, move on, seems to me that's such an antiquated term. I like to say we evolve and adapt.
Yes.
What are some other strategies for people that they can implement that are dealing with the loss? We'll specifically talk about the loss of a loved one. What are some other things you suggest, or what are some things that's helped you?
So, first and foremost, my advice to anybody, and let me just start by saying, anybody that's listening that's lost someone unexpectedly, I feel you. I mean, I feel you. As I say that, I'm getting a lump in my throat,
Mm-hmm.
because I will never, never forget what that felt like. I remember the moment I got the phone call. Unfortunately, I wasn't in great communication with my ex-wife,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody saw something on a Facebook page, posted something on my Facebook page. My wife saw it. She messaged this person and said, would you please remove that? If something's happened to his son, I don't want him to find out that way. And so I got the
Wow.
call from my wife. She's like, I think something has happened to Ryan. And I know the spot where I pulled over. It's an entry to this little gated community. I drive by it often. I
Mm.
went from there and pulled into a cul-de-sac and called my employer and said I may need to take a couple of days off from work. And
Wow.
so I will always remember that moment. And I want to, because I don't ever want to lose sight of or lose touch with the people who are standing there now in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah. So if you're listening and you've gone through that, I am standing there with you, right? I remember what that is. But my advice, the things that I would say to anyone is, knowledge is power. Knowledge is absolute power. And so, when you can get your wits about you. I mean, I tried to read early on after my son passed, and I
Mm-hmm.
was pretty much pushing my eyes along pages. I had to go back and do a lot
Mm-hmm.
of rereading. But, you know, learn, like, listen to videos like this. Maria Lessie's group, Loving Life After
Mm-hmm.
Loss, is an incredible place to just go and see other people's conversations. You don't even have to participate. Give yourself and open yourself up to listening and learning. And then ultimately, remember that you are a whole human being, that you are physical, that you are mental, that you are spirit, that you are feeling, that you are logic. And that
Mm-hmm.
when a life event impacts you like that, if you unexpectedly lose a loved one, allow each one of the parts of that whole you to exercise, to move. We tend to, when we're impacted by an event like that, sometimes the limbic brain takes over. There's a term called an amygdala hijack, where basically the
Yeah.
amygdala just shuts everything else down, right? And sometimes that happens when we're really upset with somebody and we say some things that maybe 2 days later, when our body chemistry levels back out, we regret what we said. But in that, give yourself an opportunity. The part of the brain that shuts down the most is the logical side, but allow yourself to make some decisions, as tiny as they are. Those decisions could be, I'm hearing enough advice, I'm done. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
taking anybody else's phone call.
Right.
I don't want anybody else's advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you could, I know it's difficult. It's so difficult, especially if you are really in the throes of your mind taking over for you. But if you can just take a breath and make little decisions. Each day after I got the news that my son passed, I tried to do just that, deciding if I was going to get up, deciding I was going to get dressed, deciding who I was going to
Mm-hmm.
talk to, because I knew, just some of my background, I knew that I had to give my logical brain a chance to have a say so in it all, or I was going to be stuck in the emotional throes of it. So, um, that could be difficult for those of you who are listening to this. Maybe you are listening because you have somebody who's struggling with addiction, or mental health issues, and you're worried that you may come to a point where you need this kind of advice or information. The best thing that you can do is to be prepared. Listen, read,
Mm-hmm.
learn. We live in a world of a ton of information. you know when I was in high school and things like this happened, there were almost no books. I can remember when
Yeah.
that Dr. Spock book, like decades
Yeah.
ago, was like the
Yeah.
only self-help book out there,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there was nothing. Or I will never hold it against my parents for how they handled parenting, because there were no manuals. Today, we have no
Right.
excuse. I mean, there's information everywhere. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation, so always
Yeah.
vet the sources. But yeah, just exercise your mind. I think it's the best way to get through things, is to think and open yourself up to possibilities, allow yourself to make decisions. 3 days after my son's memorial service, I got up, I looked at my wife, I said, I'm putting some clothes on, I'm going back to work. I will probably sit there and do nothing. I'll probably stare
Mm-hmm.
at my computer, but I'm going to make the decision to take that step back towards normal.
How long did it take you to actually start, not just going to work and stuff, but actually doing this, loving life after, and your advocacy, and maybe writing a book? I know you're working on that. I know for me it took 14 months. That's the day I woke up and quit drinking, was December 24th, 2017. I attribute that day to really, I was probably even working on my book during that time. I don't remember when I started it, but that day, kind of, to me, the day I hang up there, is that's the day I drew a line in the sand. Do you have a day like that?
That first day that I went back to work,
So
I,
three
I
days after?
3 days after, I saw
Man,
a glimmer of hope. But
yeah.
there were, between
That's,
that third day after his memorial service, there were 3 days before and 3 days after. So there was a 6 day window. And
mm,
there were nights in that 6 to 7 day window when I would lay there at night feeling all that just
mm-hmm.
terrible, awful stuff, right?
Can't explain
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
I played all the games in my
Yep.
head. I thought
Right.
about the whole butterfly effect thing. Oh, if I'd have called him that morning, then this would have
Yeah.
been different. And the ripple effects would have,
Yeah.
oh, it's all my fault. He died because I
Yeah.
didn't call him. And, I mean,
Yeah.
I played all those tapes in my head. I did all of that. Right. And there were a couple of nights and I was seeing it as a battle between the light and the darkness. And there were a couple of those nights when I looked at my wife and I'm like, God, I don't know if I wake up and do this again tomorrow, like,
Hmm.
am I going to be able to keep putting up the fight? And I remember laying there a couple of evenings thinking to myself, excuse my French, why in the hell would I want to wake up and do
Hmm.
and do this again? Right.
Now, do you have other kids?
I have an older son. He's 33 years old.
How did he take this?
Unfortunately, as a result of that divorce and separation, he was called upon to be loyal to his mother. So he and I
Sure.
don't have that much of a
Yeah.
relationship. So
Complicated.
yeah, there was at that point it was very
Understandable.
complicated. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that didn't really that added a layer of complication to the whole situation because I wasn't even sure that I would go to the memorial service just because I knew that there was
Yeah.
going to be an environment there of
Every
discomfort.
family dynamic is different, and
Yeah,
believe me, I respect that.
yeah, that one was
Because
interesting. Well, and
yeah,
that's something else too, because people will say, "Well, is that the most difficult thing that you've ever gone through? Is losing a son?" Well, that was certainly difficult, but also having a 33-year-old son that doesn't have a relationship with me, that wasn't easy either. But they're
hmm
both things that I have been able to, like you said, adapt, adjust, and grow. Right, not just
hmm
move on or move beyond it. But my son that we don't communicate. He is on his journey. I am on my journey. I hope that his journey is fulfilling, that his life is fulfilling. I love him. I always will. Folks have the tendency to want to say or comfort me and say, "Oh, he'll call someday. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't."
yeah.
And maybe if we hooked up 5 years down the road, maybe we would like each other. Maybe we wouldn't. Right? I mean, these are the real conversations that we can have with ourselves instead of just sort of acquiescing to typical narratives as to how life should be. So
You seem quite calm and holistic. Do you meditate?
I have a very difficult time sitting still to meditate, but I believe in what I call moving to meditate. I've got when I'm meditating, I'm on my mountain bike.
I like
When I'm
that.
on that mountain bike, I have to focus on that trail. If I'm on my
Mm.
skis, I have to be very mindful of what I'm doing.
It's
And
like being in
that's,
the zone, right?
yeah, I've got to get in that zone.
Yep.
And that's my meditation. I'm out in
Hmm.
nature, I'm focused, and then I'm able to leave the rest of the world behind. And I
I'm
can
so happy you
literally
said
just
that,
think
Chris,
of it.
because I think meditation gets oversold. I have a chapter in my book called Meditation. I probably took that bait because I hadn't meditated at all until Seth died, and then I had to find a way to be more aware of my thoughts, not like controlling them or anything like that. Just simply be aware of them,
Yeah,
and then that idea of impermanence, that even the worst of times die.
yeah,
And you and I were on the floor crying and just, as I say in my book, you're on the bottom of the abyss on your back. You're looking straight out of the abyss, and you can't go any further because the only other place is death.
yeah,
And I've been there. I know you've been there. It's a horrible place, but it's a great place to learn from,
yeah,
because really, if you have that lens and you're looking up out of the abyss, there's only one way to go.
yeah,
It's up.
yeah,
So I tell people, and you do a very good job. You eloquently explain this very well, of how people need to look at things that happen to them as things that happen for them. You and I discussed this the other day,
yeah,
and that's why I asked you about meditation, because you don't seem too cluttered. You seem very well structured in the way you're presenting your thoughts and everything, and I think that helps you with what you are dealing with every day, and I know it helps me, because as full blown attention deficit, the more I can just almost laugh at how ridiculous my brain can be, how just unbelievably I sit back and listen to I look at my thoughts and I'm going, you guys are just crazy. You guys are really crazy. That's how I kind of like third party my own brain. It's like, we all do that. We talk to ourselves all the time, which is kind of crazy because who are you talking to? um, but in reality, that self help. I mean, you can talk yourself off the ledge literally. And I'm just going to compliment you because I don't meet too many people on this journey that seem to be pretty in control of their emotions and thoughts as you do. And that was one of the first things that I really, grasped onto when we talked, especially your idea of changing the process of grief. I never really had anyone present it that way. I thought that's pretty cool because I think a lot of my ability to deal with what I go through and what I will go through. My mom died in November, so you talk about order. I want son, wife, mom.
Yeah,
Sprinkle a
complete
cat in there too. That I
reverse.
put down. It's like, so it didn't go in the order that I certainly didn't expect, but that's the order that life presented to me, right?
Yes.
And I can either
Yes.
say, what's the life lesson? Like I told my boys when their brother died. I talked about the two roads. It's a backbone of my journey. Two roads to go down. One road of anger, despair, and hatred. One road of inspiration and motivation. I'm on the second road. I ask you to join me. I think that mindset is. I don't know you that well, but it seems like you're pretty pragmatic that way as well. I saw a podcast where somebody was talking about the only difference between he was in a prison, and he said the only difference between me or you and the people outside this prison is they took a left turn when you took a right turn. And I got to thinking, it's all little choices. I mean, both our sons died by fentanyl, but they really started that journey with a series of very poor choices. I know Seth did. He was incarcerated a number of times and drunk drivings and plenty of warnings. You mentioned one thing about Ryan. You said, he was fearless. I have a chapter in my book called Fearless. Seth had no fear. He wasn't afraid of me, wasn't afraid of mom, he wasn't afraid of cops, he wasn't afraid of his teachers, and he certainly wasn't afraid of death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that fearlessness can be great if you're an endurance athlete or you're an entrepreneur. It's great, but when you're a risk taker, it can be a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to jump in because, it is very often that someone, says the things about me that you've just said, that I seem to be very, stable, even calm, focused, in control. But I want anybody listening to understand that what you see is a concerted effort.
Hmm.
I have a brain that goes a million miles per hour. I can sit and try to meditate, and I will probably also try to decipher the secrets of the universe, work on my next problem at work.
Right.
My brain never shuts off. I have a difficult time falling asleep at night, but the why I seem so calm and level is because I don't fight it.
Right.
I am aware of who I am. I am aware of all the facets that make up this crazy person that I am. That sometimes in my brain I'm a complete train wreck.
Hmm.
And so I think it's important that I say that because I think sometimes we meet people and think they were born that way. I mean, I have a friend. He's an incredible human being. He's a PhD in neuropsychology, and he's that guy when you meet him that you pinch yourself. Like, is he really that happy all the time? Right?
Right.
I joke with him and say, I got to sneak in one night while you're sleeping because I think you smile in your sleep. Right? But we begin to do this evaluative process. Well, he must have had the best childhood ever, and we
Yeah.
start to piece together how could somebody be that positive and that happy. So with somebody like me, yes, I mean, as I sit here, I am uh, very much in control of my emotions, and I'm able to stop and think through things very logically. But it was a lot of exercise because I grew up pretty scatterbrained and
Hmm.
having difficulties focusing, and so this is part of embracing who I am. That's who I am. I can't shut the brain off. It's I'm thinking of six other things while I'm talking to you right now. But I think when people allow that to get to them, and they allow it to bother them, and they think, oh, I've got to turn it off. I've got to turn it off. And they make hundreds of fruitless attempts
Mm-hmm.
at meditating in a still position, which I've realized I can do it every once in a while, but that's not really where I can, dial things down. And so because I've had to work so hard at it, then it's prepared me to handle the things that life throw at me. When you mentioned earlier, how long did it really take me to get to the point to where I could, function and begin to move in a positive direction after getting the news of my son? And I mentioned going back to work 3 days after his memorial service. But
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, on that day, I kind of noticed that people would walk by the office and they would look at me like maybe they were going to walk in. But when you have a child that dies, you go back to work, you're a little toxic, right? Like nobody knows
What do
quite
I
what to
say?
say to you. Yeah, like what do I
I don't
say
want
to
to
this
trigger him.
guy? Right, right. I
Right.
don't, like if he starts crying, it's going to be really uncomfortable. Oh my
Yep.
God. And
Yep.
so every once in a while, somebody, God bless them, would muster up the courage and they'd walk in. But I noticed this one individual that she wasn't one of my direct reports. She answered to somebody else, but she kept walking by and then she'd walk by again. And I thought, she's trying to build up her courage. And so she walks in, I stand up to greet her. I immediately am thinking I need to put her at ease because she looks terrified, right? And I was
Right.
expecting her to figure out something to say to me. And she looked at me and she goes, and at this point, I actually didn't know that my son had died from fentanyl.
Mm.
And so she walks in my office and she looks at me and says, I really hate to come in here and bother you with this, but I have a son that struggles with addiction and he's disappeared.
Mm.
And I'm
Wow.
terrified that we're going to
Wow.
find him in a hotel room somewhere and that
Right.
this is going to be it. And in that moment, I realized that what I had gone through was absolutely going to become an opportunity for me to help other people.
Mm.
And in that moment, I thought, as I get through this, and I knew I would get through it, I
Right.
thought, I'm going to have to take notes. I'm going to have to leave a breadcrumb trail for other people. And it was really that day that I made that first concerted effort. I thought, you know what, maybe I should start making notes. And that was kind of the beginning of this, 6.5 year plus book or whatever, however long I've been working on it. But yeah, and I was able to turn that corner simply because I had to make that decision to either stand there and just continue to be my own victim in this whole thing,
Yeah.
or maybe I could actually get through it and help somebody else.
And it was unintentional that you were going to help somebody, but the fact you were in action and not at home sitting in your
Yeah.
bed, feeling sorry for yourself, the fact you were in action, an opportunity presented itself and you were able to help somebody that day. And I think that's the moral of the story with a lot of people like you and I and a lot of people out there that are going through things is be in action.
Yeah.
I learned that. I saw Matthew McConaughey get an interview and he was talking about his dad. And his dad told him when he was in Hollywood, he said, be less impressed, be more in action. So I wrote a blog on that idea. And what his dad was simply saying is as you go through life, don't be, fall in love with all the movie stars and the rock stars and the rich people and the famous authors. He said, just be in motion, just keep doing stuff.
Yeah.
And that's helped me tremendously, Chris. If someone would ask me what's the one thing that has got you to where you're going and what you're doing with your Living Undeterred project and the kind of the how we want to upset the apple cart in the mental health industry by building this machine of collaborators like yourself and Marie and all these people that we're meeting with. But I don't know. It's I forgot where I was going with that story, but it happens with attention deficit. I just go used to it. Oh, I know I was going to ask you. I am a big fan of and Coach Jim Valvano. You remember Coach Jim Valvano was with North Carolina State, and he died of cancer. And he gave a speech at the ESPYS while he was dying. I think he died like weeks or months after the speech. Probably one of the most spontaneous, raw, greatest motivational. They played every year, and it's been like 30 years now since he died. But in that speech, he said something I think everybody that hears the speech remembers the one thing. And the point was, if you're not laughing and crying and learning each day, you're not having a full day. So you laugh every day, right?
Yeah.
And you cry every day, right?
Yeah, I have not yet arrived at that place where every day is rainbows and butterflies.
Me
Yeah,
neither, brother. Me neither. No,
yeah,
and I don't know. That's an illusion, like the illusion of permanence, the illusion of unicorns and rainbows and butterflies in my life. Um, just like to me, I think, and I'll say this, and I hope this doesn't go wrong, but like careful how I say this publicly, but for me, I can only speak for me. Depression doesn't work. I tried it, I didn't like it, so I quit. So I will sometimes say that, depression doesn't exist. Depressive moments do.
yeah,
Depression to me is a period of time.
yeah.
A depressive moment, hell, I have those every day. I
Oh
have
yeah,
probably hundreds a day.
yeah,
Just sitting here with you, I've had moments where I went back and could see my son, and I got my book sitting here, and real quick, I get a little down, and then boom, I figure out a way to get out of that. So I allow myself depressive moments. You mentioned about fighting upstream or, fighting against the current. It's like, I think we are kind of wired to do that,
yeah,
but I'm not sure that's in grief and trauma. I just think you need to just kind of put the oars down and just let the current take you and just look at the beauty of what's around us and be grateful. I have two boys, and I'm very fortunate because they literally saved my life during this whole thing. And then when their mom was dying of alcohol abuse, I went to them constantly, and I'm very grateful that I have two of my three boys still here. Um, and a lot of people don't have that. I've got a number of people I met on this journey that have lost their only two sons to overdose, their only daughter to suicide, or in one case, a husband and a daughter was killed by a drunk driver.
hmm,
It's just like, but these people find gratitude.
yeah,
It's there. Gratitude's all around us. I'm grateful to meeting you and Maria a couple weeks ago. It's like, well, you have to be open to accept it, and you have to look for it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. The I help Maria on her site, right? Her Facebook group, Loving Life After Loss, and we have a little moderator group, and we'll talk behind the scenes about just listening to the things that people are posting. I think you and I talked about where we've seen other support sites when you look, they're not very positive, right? There's just a
Yeah, they
lot of
just they
negativity and
implode from
darkness.
inside.
Right. They basically, in some ways, try to help people to continue to wear their grief as if though it's a warm
Yeah,
blanket, right? And
yeah,
so, I looked at Maria. I'm like, do you mind if I just post a statement on the site, and just to see, where this leads? And I just put in quotes. What if everything you have ever been told about grief is a lie? Right, and I let that fall there, and it was interesting to see the responses that what people wanted to do in some instances was to very heavily defend the
mm.
particular social constructs that they had acquiesced to, or bought into, as to
And
what
I would
grief
have
is
expected
supposed to
that,
be.
Chris,
Yeah,
fully.
exactly. And the reality of it is that if we did just that, I mean, this book that I'm writing, that I've got, chapters that focus on various things that I think that will help people be able to navigate through any things that take place in life, right? But I think if the one thing, if I could sum it all up, is to, question why, question why there's so many things that we've bought into. One of the great examples that I like to use is, why do we think that a diamond is worth what it's worth? And it
Hmm.
goes back to a 1960s advertising campaign by the De Beers Mining Company. Somebody there realized, if I can connect this stone to emotion and ego, we'll all be millionaires, right?
Mm.
And that was kind of like the big push and the birth of having a nice big rock on your,
Hmm.
engagement, on your ring finger. And to this
Hmm.
day, if somebody walks up and says, I just got engaged, our brain goes to that hand. We want to
Hmm.
see that diamond, right?
That's
But
true.
but really, a diamond isn't worth anything. I mean, what is its practical purpose? Well, you can use diamond tip blades and drills to cut things, but they can
Sure.
produce those in a lab. So the ones
Right.
that they dig out of the ground don't, I mean, what are they really worth? They sparkle. But we've
So we're
all
putting
bought
we're putting
into,
the value on it.
we put the value on it. And we do the same
Right.
thing with the events and occurrences that take place in our life. Our life is a string of countless events and occurrences, like
And
grains of
that
sand
could
on a
be good
beach.
and bad, right? We put the
Yeah.
value on a photograph that hurts our heart. The photograph doesn't hurt our heart. We put that emotion in that
Yeah.
picture. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And so, if, for instance, the evaluation or the amount of weight that we put on a thing, one of the conversations that Marie and I had on her site was about how the tendency for people to think that the worst unexpected death that can occur is when a parent loses a child, right?
Hmm.
But I look at that and say, okay, so my son died, but would it really be less impactful if my wife died? I mean, my wife, who I
Hmm.
spend every single waking moment with and have shared a bond and a
Exactly.
connection with.
Yeah.
And so, and I, at one occasion, a friend of mine, her father passed. It hadn't been that long since my son had passed, and she was getting upset about the passing of her father. And she stopped and she looked at me. She goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't even be saying any of this stuff to you. You lost a child, right?" And it's like, well, it's really not a it's not a weight and balance system. These
Yeah.
are the
We're
events and
not
occurrences
comparing
that happen.
grief. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And
Yep.
so the fact that we do that is really just kind of an amplified version of the fact that we believe what we believe, we feel what we feel, and a lot of it has to do with social influences. And so I
Mm.
think it's okay to question. Don't ever let anybody make you feel like you're expected to grieve for a certain period of time. I'll hear people say, "Wow, they seem to have gotten over that rather quickly." Compared to what? Like,
Yeah.
what is the measure for that?
I want to just jump on something here because I think you could take what you just said and pretty much go into any discipline. Let's
Yeah.
just talk about alcoholism, for example. People that just are convinced it's a disease, and everyone tells you it's a disease, and the 12-step people tell you it's a disease, and you're held prisoner to the seductions of this thing called alcohol. And then you know I never went to med school. I've never studied this stuff, and I was an alcoholic since I was in 8th grade. But I woke up one day and just quit. Now I quit because I had some motivation. I buried a child, and my wife was dying for alcohol abuse, and I thought I'd quit to help her. I never even considered it being a disease. I didn't buy that social imprint that, yeah, it's a disease. But you get into conversations with people that are so convinced it's a disease that they literally have to have that because that explains their inability to win this fight because it's a disease. And so it becomes a crutch in a way. Now, if you say that, the backlash is just, I mean, you get cancel cultured on social media if you say that. But I feel like I can say that because I did quit. And it really came down to me a left or right turn. And I think more people can believe that way. And if you can trick your brain, I like to say that quote. I say it around my kids all the time. If you can trick your brain, it's like the placebo effect. If I give you a pill and say, you will sleep like a baby tonight, and I give you this pill, first, maybe I gave you sleeping pills for the first 4 or 5 days. Then I sleep in a sugar pill. You're going to sleep like a baby. I mean, it's scientifically proven. So maybe our brain, we can kind of self-induce our own placebo effect. And so I just, to me, it's been the easiest thing I've ever had to do in my life to quit drinking. And if I can't learn something from what I went through, then I might as well just drink myself to death. Because I'm not going to get any 12-step class that's going to teach me to quit drinking any better than burying two people that I love, that I lost to this stuff. I'm not going to pay any motivational coach to get in my head and get me to quit any more than burying two people I love. We talked about how many life coaches and everything that's out there today. It's like, so I wanted to ask your thoughts on seems like our lack of society's acceptance to accept choice being more powerful than the alternative, and that's being held prisoner to all these things that everyone tells us we have to subscribe to.
Yeah, again, there's, I mean, so much of our existence is built around these social constructs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we know that our behaviors and the things that we do, the way we dress, the way we comb our hair, I mean, we know that there's definitely social constructivism going there because we can visit some other place in the world that doesn't have the same social influences and they're doing things completely different, right?
Good
There are
point.
societies that when somebody dies, they actually see it as a long-term illness, and
Hmm.
they'll bring the body into the house and it stays in there for months, right? While they're because their belief system is structured completely different than ours. And so
Hmm.
if everything was just universal, then we would all see it the same. We don't. So therefore, we end up wired differently, and a lot of it is that social influence. And so the social influence in the United States is different than other places. And so what we hear and what we see, especially in this digital world, which is a whole other subject to get into, is how we're trying to live under the false expectations of a virtual reality, right? I mean, I think it's
Hmm.
crushing us. We weren't designed to live virtually. We're living, breathing beings. But anyways,
Oh, and by the way, I sent your question to James Miller. You were on the live stream, your question, and I was on James' podcast this morning.
yeah.
I was a guest on a show, and I was talking about your question because I saw your question come up, and I had to get him off the stage because I had more people in the background. And so I went ahead and pulled your question and sent it to him. So he'll get an answer for you because I love that
Yeah.
the way you phrased that question.
Yeah, I knew it wasn't a 30-second answer when I posted. I thought,
No, that's why I didn't give it to him.
I'm
It would
thinking
have
you
been
might.
unfair
Yeah.
to him to answer it.
So, anyways, this whole idea of either having choices or feeling like we're trapped in things and we're helpless in things and there's no way out. I mean, I see these comments buzz around a lot when it comes to drug addiction, right? And people will say, yeah, but okay, well, if drug addiction's a disease, the first time they used, now that was a choice, right? And it gets
Yep.
complex because for some people, the first time they used, a doctor prescribed something for them, right? All of
Mm-hmm.
my mountain biking and skiing, I've destroyed the discs in my spine and I'm in pain and my fingers are tingling while I sit here. And the only thing that they've offered me is medication, right? There's no surgery, there's
Of
no
course.
fixing it. You can't
Yeah.
regrow your discs. And they're like, well, we're going to send you for pain management. I'm like,
Of
oh,
course.
you're going to go and have me sign up for Oxycontin, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And if I would have, bought into what the doctor said and I was too uncomfortable to live with the pain that I have, I might have gone down that road, right? So sometimes it's a choice. Sometimes people do what they're told by doctors, right? There are people
Right.
who've grown to listen to doctors. So it is complex. And just so you know, 4.5 years ago, my wife and I quit drinking alcohol. So we really don't do anything. And I was
Mm-hmm.
a wine enthusiast. I still have a
So was
collection.
I.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 200
My
bottles sitting in
my
two wine
dog is
fridges
named
in another
Camus.
room.
My dog's named Camus, and my cat was named Opus.
So here's how bad I am. In your video, when you talk about it and you're reaching for the glass,
Yeah.
even though I only saw half of it, I knew it was a Camus label that was
It
on that
was,
bottle.
yep. And actually, I didn't want to open it because it's a long story. It's my podcast, so I could tell it. But I keep a bottle of Camus next to my bed just
Yeah.
to mock it,
Yep.
just to laugh
Yep.
at it. And I go out to dinner
Yep.
by myself. I order a glass of Camus by myself, and I
Yeah.
won't drink it. And the
Yeah.
wait staff will come over and say, well, I have to ask, how was your meal? And I say, good. And they say, how was your wine? I just say, I don't drink. And I leave it at that. I let them figure out how crazy I am. But I do that as a trick to prove to myself I don't need to drink. Now, how many
Yeah.
quote alcoholics keep a bottle of wine next to their bed? But yeah, that was my bottle. And we had to use grape juice to pour in the glass because I didn't want to ruin the bottle. And this is coming from a guy that doesn't drink. It's like, okay, I don't want to ruin the bottle, but I'm never going to drink it. So, I don't know. Again, going back to these society constructs you talk about, is like I don't want to participate. I don't have to play.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about attention deficit disorder. I don't allow anyone around me to use the last D.
Yeah.
It's not a disorder. And if a doctor tells you it's a disorder, get a new doctor, because I don't think it is. I think there's a spectrum. There's obviously kids at 10 and 9 that probably need to have watered down Adderall, whatever. But
Right.
certainly my attention deficit has been the best thing that, if there is a God, the best thing that God ever gave me was my attention deficit, because it allows me to do a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. I don't always do it well, but I do a lot of things, and you're wired the same way. But
Yeah. Yeah.
attention deficit is another label and stigma I'm trying to change, especially with kids.
There's a
You know,
different label for that. You are, like me, a mental multitasker.
I like it.
That's what it
That's the
is.
third thing I'm going to steal from you. I'm going to write that down.
I mean, I can have several different things going on in my head at the same time. And you mentioned a little bit before about talking to yourself. I always say it's perfectly okay to talk to yourself as long as you're a good listener, right? I mean, hey,
Or win the argument, one of the two.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, that whole thing with drinking and for us now, neither one of us would have by anybody's standards, have been diagnosed or labeled as an alcoholic. I wasn't needing to drink to self-medicate,
Right.
but I love the social life of it. We have
I do too.
wonderful little wineries here in New Mexico. Folks don't know that we're the oldest wine country in the United States because Napa gets all the credit.
Right.
Those kind of things. And I have apprenticed at a couple of wineries and was actually real close to signing into a deal to go in with a local vintner and a local microbrewery
Hmm.
owner to open up a winery. But I've decided not to go down that route because I don't want to create something that I wouldn't participate in myself anymore these days. And I
Right.
still have my collection. It's not that I won't take a taste. I have a 2005 Margaux from France that when I have friends
Oh
over
man.
and if we have a steak dinner, I will have a sip, right? But I realized it was our social life. I mean, we were
Yeah.
doing wineries and microbrews, and I mean, we got like a
Yep.
champagne winery here, Gruet, and we were
Right.
members over there, and cases were being shipped to us all the time, and
Hmm.
trips to Napa, and that was the most difficult part was friends of ours had called and said, will you do a 45-day cleanse with us and not drink? We're like, okay. Quite
Sure.
frankly, I love them, but they really needed to. And the
Yeah.
hardest thing was reworking our social life. And the reality of it was everybody else in our social life was far more uncomfortable with us not drinking than we were. And to this day, when we
Isn't that
go out
funny?
and everybody else is drinking, like they don't know what to do with us.
You know,
And they
I,
have
I
to
love
they
the
have to talk about it.
I love the way that you've just approached all these things, and that's why I said I had to talk to you because I think you and I are so similar in so many fronts. But even just the word sobriety, I don't even use the word sober because that implies I'm in a fight, and I'm not in a
Yeah,
fight. And here's what's funny: I may have a sip of that wine with you someday. I'm not telling people I'm never going to drink again. I just not
yeah,
drinking today,
yep,
and I haven't drank for whatever how many years it's been since 2017. I'm not telling anybody I'm not drinking tomorrow. I got to live the tomorrow first, and
yep,
if I make it tomorrow, then I'll choose whether I want to drink. I will tell you right now, I will have a glass of wine before I die. Probably at my son's wedding when they get married, or maybe when I get married again, or if I ever do. You
I'm
know,
predicting it's going to be my 2005 Margot that I've been saving for the past 15 years. But
I'd say if I'm anywhere remotely close, I'm not kidding you. I would be honored to have a sip of that. And you know what? I wouldn't say I broke my streak. I don't play streaks. I think
uh,
alcoholics torture themselves with going on social media with signs saying that all they're doing is when they inevitably become human and they fall off the wagon, then they're just going to self-loathe to death, literally, and then they got
yeah,
to start all over again.
yeah,
And I was on an app for a while that kept streaks on your meditation days. And finally, the guy said, "This is ridiculous because people are just going in and clicking on they meditated just to keep their streak." So I
right,
think personally, for me, another narrative I'm trying to break with people that don't want to drink is stop keeping track. Now, 12 step doesn't tell
yeah,
you that. They
no,
think, well, it reinforces. I don't know if it does. It creates more anxiety and stress, to my opinion.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
don't drink today. How much harder is that?
Yeah. Yep. And for us, not drinking was just a matter of looking at our social life and the amount of energy and minutes. I mean, our life is made up of moments and minutes. And I was
Right.
thinking about the amount of moments I was cashing in on the social elements of alcohol.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, I really, given the choice to sit in a winery or be out on my mountain bike somewhere, what would I really rather do, right?
Right.
Where do I want to spend my moments? You only have so
Right.
many in the hopper, and I
Right.
just didn't want to spend them in that place as much anymore. And though I didn't feel like I was drinking to cope, I didn't feel like I was drinking to self-medicate, but nonetheless, every time that I was drinking, you could deny it all day long, but you are under the influence of that drug. and
Hmm.
and I realized I love things wide awake. When my son passed, a couple days or so into it, after I made the announcement out in public on social media, the woman that lost her daughter that died on a car accident on the way to church,
Hmm.
she reached out to me, and I know she was trying to be helpful. She didn't want me to overlook the help that I could receive if I would consider medication. She remembered just how completely
Mm.
destroyed she was over this event, put
Right.
herself in my shoes and thought, God, if this is just ripping you to shreds, don't be embarrassed or feel bad to go see a doctor and maybe get some Valium or something to take the edge off. Because for some people, that the chemical imbalance that takes place in that limbic brain response is really just unimaginable.
Hmm.
But the one thing I said to my wife was, no matter how this transpires, I'm going to go through it not under the influence of anything else. I don't care how much it hurts. I don't care how painful it is.
That's
I just,
great.
for
Yeah.
some reason, feel
Yep.
like I got to feel it. Like I got to feel it raw. Like I got to
Yeah.
do it raw. And so experiencing something like that raw, and then choosing to continue on in life, experiencing all of life raw and not under the influence of anything other than my own mental capacity, that's something that works for me, right? The
Yeah.
legalization of marijuana, we're going to have people that are going to walk around probably always a little bit under the influence, and maybe that's how
Yeah.
they want to go through life. But for me, I just want to be wide awake.
It's one of those things. I agree with you too. I think my grief recovery and so forth, my evolution has been by not being, I take like 3 supplements. That's it. I don't take anything. But if you think about this, if you know in advance that when you get off medicine, that you have a negative letdown or withdrawal, let's say,
Yeah,
and therefore you make a conscious decision not to go on it, well, then you never really have to worry about the letdown or the
yeah,
I just said the word yeah, you don't have to worry about that.
right.
So that's one of the reasons why I never did drugs is I didn't want the other effect of having to feel like I always had to do it. So at a very young age, I was fairly cognizant that as attention deficit, all the things that I had, if I did drugs, it wouldn't, I would love them so much. I'd want to do them all. If I saw a
Yeah,
bag of Coke, I'd want to snort the whole bag, not just whatever you do when you snort Coke, but and I knew just at that young age, I'd be the death of me. And fortunately, I had that, the foresight to make those decisions. But I just noticed we're at an hour and 11 minutes, dude. I
I
mean,
know. I
that's how
just
when good conversation goes. It's like, it's like we killed a good bottle of Cabernet right now. It's like, no, I really enjoy the conversation today. I certainly fully expect that we're going to hook up or collaborate at some level. Whether I come out on the tour can talk to you or have you talk or, get you involved somehow in some of the projects we have. I got tons of respect for Marie. She's already reached out to me to kind of get involved like you're doing. And I've thrown my hat in the ring, until I have too many rings I'm involved in. Right now I'm okay, but I'm really honored to have you come on the show. So if people want to reach you, either to have you as a guest on a show or to just pick your brain because you seem to be a pretty interesting person to talk to, how do people reach you?
just the easiest thing is my website, lovinglifeafter.com. And
I
then on
love it.
there, there's a form you can fill out that'll send me an email. And I actually have one of the little calendar invite things that I set up that somebody can go in if they want to schedule a talk. You and I talked about the life coach thing, and
Hmm.
I feel that it's sort of a sacred thing, and I'm very reluctant to don the title. But what I do is make myself available.
Hmm.
If I've said something that somebody thinks that maybe a conversation with me would be helpful, that's what I'm here to do. I make a wonderful living with my wife in the mortgage business. I'm not in a position where I would need to, go down a path where I would, need to make a living helping
Hmm.
folks. So at this point in my life, I volunteer my time to help people.
Well, I know Ryan's awful proud of you. So, and I'm trying to keep Prudence and Seth proud of me as well.
I'm
So,
sure they are. I'm sure they
listen,
are.
man, I love you like a brother. Appreciate very
Same
much your
here.
time, and I look forward to talking again with you soon. Okay.
Absolutely. Talk soon.